Sometimes an idea just hits you, and the timing is right, and your life just goes spiraling in an entirely new direction as a result. That's kind of what it felt like for me at the beginning of 2020 when I was volunteering for the Andrew Yang presidential campaign. I had never really engaged with politics prior to that election, but when I heard about the idea of universal basic income, it really inspired me. I believe that there are so many people in our everyday lives that are capable of amazing things, but they aren't doing those amazing things because they're shackled by their finances. I personally know people who are smart and creative and skilled, but they're stuck working bullshit jobs that don't utilize any of their potential. So I imagined what the world would look like if every one of those people was actually spending their time doing something they loved and something they cared about. And I became mesmerized by this idea. And Andrew Yang made it seem possible by pointing out how automation and algorithms could be leveraged into providing that financial liberty for everyone. I was so inspired by this idea that I became a very active member of the Yang Gang. I started volunteering here locally in Seattle as much as I could, and eventually traveled all the way to Iowa to knock on doors and even participate in the Iowa caucus as a precinct captain on behalf of the Andrew Yang campaign. I just wanted to do everything in my power to try to make universal basic income a reality. That whole period of time was such a fun and eye-opening experience for me. But ultimately, Yang didn't manage to rouse up the support and get the votes he needed to become the candidate. So shortly after the votes came in Iowa and New Hampshire, he announced the suspension of his campaign.
I stand before you tonight and say that while we did not win this election, we are just getting started.
And in a way, it kind of felt like the dream came to an end. It was only a couple weeks after that the entire world locked down due to COVID, and the optimistic UBI-powered future that we'd been fighting for felt more distant than ever as we faced the bleak reality of living with a pandemic. It's now been 2 years since Yang ended his presidential campaign, and in some ways it does feel like the effort we put in made an impact, as things like stimulus checks and the child tax credit became a center point around our economic recovery during the pandemic. But on the other hand, it does kind of feel like the UBI movement hasn't been as united ever since. Rather than harnessing the momentum of his national grassroots support, Andrew Yang focused his efforts on what ended up being a failed mayoral campaign. Later, he would announce the formation of a new political party focused primarily on ranked choice voting.
And 62% of Americans right now want an alternative to one of the two major parties.
While some Andrew Yang supporters have been totally enthusiastic about these new projects, others have been more critical. One such person is today's guest, Hannah Wan, who is a Seattle-based basic income advocate who hasn't been shy about her disagreements with Yang's approach. Hannah was one of the people like myself who felt so enthusiastic about UBI and so hopeful we could make it happen that she went all the way out to Iowa to help with Yang's presidential campaign. But unlike many of the other people who were interested in Yang's campaign, Hannah's involvement with the UBI movement hasn't slowed down after that presidential campaign ended. She's worked with other candidates and organizations, and she's talked to representatives to keep the conversation about basic income moving forward. So I thought that Hannah would be a good person to sit down and chat with over how the basic income movement has evolved over the past few years. Here's that conversation. Enjoy. All right, and we are recording. Hannah, thank you so much for joining me, making the trip out here. For those watching, I am sitting down with Hannah Wan, who is an advocate for universal basic income, who has co-founded the organization Testify for UBI, and has experience working with the Andrew Yang campaign, the David Kim campaign, and with organizations like the Income Movement. I first heard about you when I was in Iowa, where everybody kept coming up to me and being like, "Oh, you're from Seattle, you must know Hannah." And I didn't know you, I hadn't met you. I added you on Twitter because everyone was saying that, and I've been following you since, but this is actually the first time we've met, so I really appreciate getting the opportunity to actually meet you and talk about this stuff with you. So to get started, I'd just like to know a little bit about your background and how you got involved in basic income advocacy.
Yeah. First of all, thanks so much for asking me to come here and speak. Um, for In terms of basic income, it's a concept that I've known about for several years before Andrew started running. And when Andrew did run on the platform of UBI, and just seeing all the energy around it and the fact that he had some sort of plan to actually implement it, it got me really excited and just like a kick in the pants to actually uh, try to work towards this goal. And so it was more like just somebody stepping up and saying, hey, I'm going to take charge, let's do this, and just bringing the people together to try to make it happen. It's what really inspired me to get involved.
For you personally, what was it about UBI or basic income in general that lit that fire for you? Because I mean, obviously, there's a lot of different progressive policies out there being talked about, whether it be like, cancellation of student debt or healthcare. But UBI seemed to capture a certain spirit in a lot of people, including myself and you. So I'm curious where that comes from for you for UBI specifically.
Yeah. So when I look at a lot of the progressive platform and the policy ideas they have, a lot of it is reactionary. So they have food stamps to account for food insecurity. They have like forgiving student loans for people who have racked up a bunch of student debt. All these programs are after the fact, and for me, like UBI was a preventative measure to make sure that people remain healthy. So for me, it's kind of like healthcare. Our healthcare right now, our actual healthcare system doesn't work because it's catastrophic care. Like people come in when something really serious has happened, and then they're asking for help. When in fact, a better healthcare system is for people to never get sick at all. So having access to healthy food, not being food insecure, just having healthy habits and getting checked up often to find things proactively before they get bigger. So financially speaking, it's the same thing. In terms of housing security, it's much easier to keep people in their home, like help them pay their rent rather than deal with it after they become unhoused. So for me, it was a financial way to keep our society healthy and keep it running. And on top of that, being somebody who was like an early achiever as a child, and getting into the workforce, it's like early achievement, early burnout. So just going into a corporation after another, I just felt like this is unbearable. It's just putting people in this bizarre situation where we don't treat people like humans anymore. We treat each other as means to an end, so that you can climb your own corporate ladder to make sure that your own family is taken care of. And it was just really depressing to me. And the fact that I felt that I couldn't enjoy my life until I earned it after 60 some years of working. And it just got me really depressed. And I felt that the privilege that rich people have to have a safety net, to be able to take risks on focusing on inventing something or starting a business multiple times over, and just having that security to branch out there and do something meaningful to them and hopefully also to society. Like that freedom isn't available to everyday people who are out there working a job. And just the whole myth of the American dream and like work hard and you'll succeed, it just grated on me after a while. And I felt that basic income was a way to break that cycle and acknowledge the work that is being done in society. Very important work that's being done that is not rewarded by our economic system. So like parenting. Parenting is hugely important. Like if we want to raise healthy children and future citizens of this country, like if we want them to grow up and not be traumatized, actually having their parents like raise them, then we need to acknowledge that caregiving and parenting is a job. And just because like companies don't pay you to raise your own child doesn't mean that it's not valuable. And so that's just one example of the type of work that in society should be rewarded in terms of a basic income, because productivity is happening, but that productivity isn't shared among society.
I should ask, were you like a politically active person before basic income like lit this fire? Was it already something that you were like kind of involved in?
Oh boy, yes. So a little bit of a confession. Back in around 2008, when I was kind of going through my depression, I guess, and also was in a very bad relationship, I came upon the Ron Paul campaign. So I went through a libertarian phase. And for me, it was more of like a way of not wanting to care about other people. For me, it was like, take care of yourself. Like, if I care about other people, then that puts a responsibility on me to actually do something about it. So in that sense, libertarianism kind of spoke to me. And also, I was very much anti-establishment, because my first election that I was able to vote in was the 2000 election, which was a huge mess. And Ron Paul just kind of spoke to me in a certain way. Like, I was learning a lot about how the government actually worked. So it was very educational, and I liked the anti-establishment part of it. And I felt that I could do more to reform the Republican Party, like in that particular race, than just go with Democrats. And of course, like living in Seattle, it's kind of like, you're a Democrat, you vote Democrat, it just means nothing. So that's how I got politically active at first. And of course, once the Tea Party started, coming up, I'm like, oh boy, oh boy, look at this. And so I ran as fast as I could. And after Ron Paul, I supported Bernie. And at that point, it was mostly just giving money and, cheering him on. And then when Andrew came along, what I liked about him was that he took the anti-establishment, like populist energy that Bernie had, but also put really great, like clear policies to go along with it. So that's what I felt was lacking with Bernie. Like, there was not a lot of follow through. There was a lot of rhetoric, but not a lot of like, well, what do I do with that? And so for Andrew's campaign, I volunteered way more. I didn't actually work for the campaign, but I did a lot of volunteer work, and most specifically with the Sorority of Yang, which was a women-focused grassroots volunteer house that was run by Katie Kinsey and Danny Hernandez to help women come and volunteer for the campaign.
So I'd love to hear about what your experience volunteering for the Andrew Yang campaign was like, and especially being part of the sorority of Yang and kind of what a lot of people deemed like a pretty male dominated like following, which I mean in my group of volunteers it was I think a more even split than a lot of other places, but there was certainly that impression that overall it was kind of a male dominated following. So I'm curious how you felt about your role during that time, and like just what that volunteering period was like for you.
Yeah. When I first volunteered with him was actually with the Humanity Forward PAC. This was the original PAC, not the one that Andrew started. But they basically paid for like room and board and transportation to go there, or at least at a discounted rate.
I did the same thing.
Yeah. So you go there, and then it's not like it was a job, but it's like they just brought you there, and then you can go volunteer as much or as little as you wanted. And I thought that was really great. And so after I did that, I kind of wanted to do more. And I saw that there was the Sorority of Yang that was set up. And the reason why it was set up was to counteract the narrative that Andrew Yang supporters were all white dudes. So I really appreciate what Katie and Danny did to set up that house and bring a bunch of people to volunteer. And at first it was definitely all women, and they were going out canvassing, they were doing trainings, doing lots of like media outreach and community outreach, and it was like a great community that I wanted to be a part of. So for my second trip to Iowa, I stayed there at the house. And unfortunately, just the commitment of dropping everything and going to Iowa for over a month, like up to 2 months, it's a huge commitment, and not a lot of people were able to do it. So like we did let in like some vetted men into the group, but it was definitely a women-led house. And I really love that. Like we set the agenda, we like we set up the strategy for how we're going to do caucusing. We found like a seasoned caucus goer, like someone who made it to the national convention like 2 times, and we brought her in to do caucus training. And a lot of the stuff that we were doing was something that the official campaign was not. So there was no caucus training in our area. Or they weren't, I don't know, we were just filling in a lot of gaps for what the campaign was doing. And I think part of the reason was that the campaign didn't decide to make Iowa a priority until the PAC and the energy of the people coming to Iowa made them think, oh yeah, maybe we could actually win Iowa, which was not the case. So yeah, I felt, for me, it just felt like the grassroots volunteers were kind of running this whole thing, and the campaign was lagging behind. And it was very ironic that they didn't really take a lot of the grassroots input into account, and it was kind of a running pattern that I would see as I continue to be a part or try to be involved with that whole universe.
Yeah. And it's been interesting to watch how the universe has gone in different directions since the presidential campaign. I think a lot of people from different backgrounds and with different ideologies were attracted to that campaign. And at the time, there was something really unifying about that, but it certainly didn't hold after the campaign ended, it seems like, in terms of a lot of those people drifted back towards maybe their original team, so to speak. So that was an interesting thing to watch. I'm curious how your reflection on that time and how your work with basic income since the presidential campaign ended has kind of drifted apart from Andrew Yang's efforts.
Yeah. So it's funny that you say that. So in Iowa, we had this great moment with our cell where our team was out canvassing and their car got stuck in the mud. And in order to get it out, there were like 2 socialists, like a Trump voter, and like a Democrat, like getting pulled out of the mud by an Iowan farmer. And we thought, oh, this is the distillation of how we're going to pull America out of the mud. We'll all come together and do that. And after Andrew ended the campaign, I felt that, hey, we could do something with this. The fact that there are so many different ideologies like coming together for this idea was a strength, because if we all went back to our communities and we talked to people within our communities and within our own spheres of influence, then we're going to have a big coalition come back the next time around when we talk about basic income. So it wasn't about creating a singular voice that is comprised of multiple people from different ideologies. It's more like, okay, we came together for this. Now let's go back and spread the word that way. So that was my vision for it. And the way that the way that Andrew Yang has been going about it is just trying to centralize it around himself, unfortunately. So even with the Forward Party that he started, I felt that if he really wanted to make the case that it was multi-partisan, that it just shouldn't be him going to like Tucker Carlson and doing it. Like, he should have found somebody who was reputable within the Republican Party, can actually speak the conservative language, also subscribes to the Forward Party like principles, and be able to speak to conservatives in a way where they can't just write them off for being a Democrat. And then, find like a really lefty person to go on like TYT and somebody who speaks that progressive language and speak to that audience, instead of being Andrew and being like, you left the Democratic Party. I don't know why you're even talking. It's like, why should we even believe you? So I found that really odd that he's just trying to like, I don't know. It's like he's shedding all that diversity that he used to have with his choices, and especially the way that he ran his mayoral campaign in New York. It was just really disappointing. In a sense, he lost his center by becoming so extremely center, like this extreme centrism that he's adopting now. And I feel that that's not really why people came together.
Yeah, it's interesting seeing how he's chosen to handle things, and I can kind of see both sides of it. Where on one side, like he's developed this, I guess, brand around himself where people associate him with these topics, and he's gotten a certain amount of like the press will give him a certain amount of attention now. So I can understand why he's trying to leverage that, but I also definitely feel what you're saying about like there needing to be more voices in the conversation. I'm intrigued by the idea of him having like a primary within the Forward Party with different candidates. I think that that could be kind of cool to see in terms of branching out from it just being around him as an individual.
Right, right.
Um,
Excuse me.
no problem. Could you tell me a little bit about your work with the David Kim campaign then? Because I know that a lot of the energy from Andrew Yang's campaign ended up going into that campaign. And I wasn't really that involved. I think I maybe donated once or twice, but that was about the extent of it. I was pretty burnt out after losing,
Right, right.
after losing the presidential, but you went for it. You were one of the people who kept being active and within the community. So I'd love to hear about what that was like.
Oh yeah, absolutely. So after the sorority was in Iowa and we did the whole caucus there, our next step was to start a house in Nevada because that was the next caucus state. And there we did a lot of excuse me. We did a lot of like early voting, tabling. We also did door knocking. So we kind of like continued the campaign even after he dropped out. And during that time, we made some connections with Tom Steyer's campaign, and I was actually able to talk with Tom Steyer's daughter and also his campaign surrogate about possibly adding BI to Tom's platform. And so we were just kind of like building that relationship, and that led to Tom's campaign paying for us to go to LA. And we did a little bit of like get out the vote calls. We didn't really do anything specifically for the Tom Steyer campaign. But at the same time, it's like, oh, hey, we know there are some UBI candidates running in LA at the time. And so so we went to check out like where a couple of those candidates were speaking. And David really came across as someone who's really genuine, policy focused, community focused, energetic, passionate. And he really liked that the sorority was kind of giving attention to his campaign. And so he asked me to be his finance director. Like we did some texting campaigns for him while we were there, and we got into helping a bit more. And he was in need of a finance director, and I had some accounting experience. So from there, I actually moved to LA for a little bit to help out with the campaign. I think I became a finance director and a strategist. So I built out the fundraising strategy for his campaign where we really wanted to tap into the larger movement, kind of like what AOC was doing, like very hyper local in what he was doing, like definitely be community focused, help people in a tangible way, and use that to tap into the larger movement, especially for fundraising. And I know he was running a district that was like the 10th poorest in the nation, ironically. So that was really important to make sure that we weren't squeezing blood from a stone, or having people give up their, life savings to help make this happen. And and so I basically used like some of the clout, the little bit of clout that I was able to amass from talking about the sorority and Andrew Yang, and use that to get his campaign more attention. And through some connections that I had with Andrew's advisors, I was able to negotiate Andrew's endorsement of David Kim, and then Andrew was able to help us get Marianne Williamson's endorsement. And at that point, I felt that they were pretty set. And then I left to start testifying for UBI.
Cool. And well, that's a great segue because I'd love to hear about Testify for UBI. And in general, I feel like after the presidential Yang campaign ended, some of the energy went to David Kim's campaign. There were a couple other smaller campaigns like Erica's that are going on as well. Mm-hmm. But it seems like in general, I guess there's been a lack of momentum around the UBI movement in terms of, I would say this is one of the faults of the way that Andrew Yang has approached this, in terms of he had all this energy and he hasn't done a great job of harnessing that and keeping it going. So you're one of the people who I think has managed to stay pretty active in terms of trying to keep pushing this fight forward. How have you been doing that, and how can other people do that?
Oh yeah, that's a great question. So for Testify for UBI, that was actually a project that started coming out of COVID, when COVID lockdowns were starting. And my friend Angela Mendoza and I, we were talking about like, oh no, like we need, this is like a prime time to get basic income at the federal level. Because we need people to stay at home. And how do you incentivize people to stay at home than to pay them to do so? And we felt that we need to inform Congress members and also the general public about the policy of UBI. So we started this project called Testify for UBI. It's not really an organization, it's just like a project that we started. And the ultimate goal was to have a hearing in Congress on UBI and get all the facts out there, and most importantly, have a diverse panel of speakers who come from all walks of life, like all political affiliations, race, sexual orientation, business owners, laborers, just across the spectrum, and have them all speak to how our current system is not helping them and how basic income would. So that was the ultimate goal. And we realized, okay, in order to get this to happen, we need senators, we need representatives to actually invite us formally to do it. And that was like a much bigger project. And that's how we tried to get Andrew's organizations involved. It's like, hey, can you help us with this? And we proposed this idea. And I don't know, we were just kind of got stonewalled for a bit. I mean, we did get a verbal invitation to testify in Congress from Representative Tim Ryan, but he kind of ghosted us after a while. So it was a much larger project than the two of us were able to do. So we tried to like leverage any connections that we had. So unfortunately, our project did not get that attention, but Andrew Yang's Humanity Forward, C4 organization, did change the entire direction of the organization based on our project. So now they're essentially a lobbying group. They had discussions with us, but they decided to go in a more like lobbying, like money focused route rather than a grassroots route that we were envisioning, because our project wouldn't have really needed any money until we actually got the invitation and need to fly people over there. Yeah, so it was just like one project after another, just trying things out. But throughout this whole time, Income Movement has been doing a lot of great work. They've been running petitions. They've been running petitions to representatives' offices. They've been targeting communications with certain senators and representatives, and they've actually made some great headway. So I think about last year, Senator Ron Wyden from Oregon penned a letter to President Biden saying, hey, we need to get recurring monthly checks to people. And I think like 20 Democratic senators signed on to that letter. And that letter came about because Income Movement organized a delivery of a petition that now has over 3 million signatures, and delivered it to Senator Wyden's office, which spurred like a follow-up conversation. And from there, he penned that letter. So it's one of the things where like, oh, a petition isn't going to do anything. It's like, no, it's a part of a whole series of actions. And for people to get involved, there's a lot of things people can do. Like you can donate to Income Movement, which is a great organization. You can participate in a petition. You can participate in delivering them to Congresspeople, writing letters, calling people, and Income Movement is just a great way to consolidate all those actions and give you ways to become involved. I think coming up on February 3rd, they are planning an action to pressure senators to extend the CTC. I mean, the child tax credit is pretty much a precursor to UBI because, you're not means testing children. It's like children can't have work requirements. And so it's a great, we just give like unconditional cash to people. And from there, you can have more direct cash programs. So yeah, February 3rd, check out Income Movement. There are ways for people to participate in as little or big increments as you want. They also run an annual basic income march. They have a couple flagpole marches, like I think in New York there's a big one, and possibly in LA another big one. But you can start an event or a rally or march in your own city within your own community also, and they will help you with setting that up.
At this point in our conversation, we actually had a technical problem and the camera stopped recording. So I'm just going to pick you guys back up when we got that fixed and continued the conversation. Okay, we had a brief interruption there, some technical difficulties, but we're going to jump right back into it. I was just about to ask you about whether you think these sort of basic income trials, whether they be the city by city trials or the things like stimulus checks or the child tax credit, whether you think these things are actually going to lead to a full-blown UBI or whether people are going to point at them as like a reason not to do UBI. We've already got these systems in place. Why do we need UBI if we already sent you a stimulus check 2 years ago? Do you think that that's something that could happen? How do you feel about that?
Yeah, I'm actually pretty optimistic about it. I definitely think we need to push on both levels. A federal is going to be a very difficult uphill climb, but I feel that all these pilots are happening across the country in cities, states, and counties. I think there are like over 90 basic income pilots happening in the United States right now. And I feel that if there are more and more and they all just kind of meld together, it's kind of like, well, why not have a federal one? And there are lots of benefits to having a federal UBI. There's the whole like moving from state to state issue. Right now, the most promising state is California, of course, because they have the LA basic income pilot. There's going to be an LA County one that's going to start. I think there's some sort of basic income pilots in like multiple cities. I think San Diego, San Francisco, and there's also a state one being considered. At the very least, one for children aging out of the foster care system. Like that's on the books. But yeah, like they're considering like a statewide basic income. And in Washington, there's also one like a state level measure that's being debated right now. So like there's lots of energy around not just city, but also at the state level. And I feel like if there's enough states doing it and there's a lot of good data coming out of it, then it would be a really good case to say, hey, let's just make this a national policy. And for me, it's not, and you talk about how people are saying like, oh yeah, like we gave it to you already, like, isn't that enough? And I think that's a great way to start a conversation. It's like, it's not so much the objections that come out of it, but how are we talking to people about the objections? So it's the job of us as advocates to continue pushing the idea that everyone deserves dignity, everyone deserves to survive. We don't need to tie our labor to our survival. And there's a lot of work that's not being compensated in our society. And in order to make it healthy, it's just like all the different talking points about why UBI is beneficial. And now there's this article that just came out about how the babies of parents that receive direct cash, like unconditional direct cash, have more brain activity than babies that do not. So it's like there's lots of evidence out there, and just having all these pilots to spur this kind of conversation is how we're going to get to the federal. Because we're not just going to magically get federal UBI. That's not going to happen. So it's more like what's happening in our community. Oh, you know, somebody who's getting basic income, how's that working for them? Or it's like, or I have all these friends who are receiving it. And just having that in our daily conversation is what's beneficial about these basic income programs. It's not just the fact of having it, but it's the actual impact that it's having on people's lives. And that's what moves a conversation forward.
In terms of like the more local conversation, I know that a lot of the candidates who seemed open to a basic income trial in Seattle, unfortunately, were not the ones who were elected. What do you think? Where do you think that leaves us locally in terms of trying to implement something local?
Right. Yeah, the last election, oh my gosh, just stabbed through the heart. Because I was able to speak with Lorena Gonzalez, and she was talking about how she and Teresa Mosqueda on Seattle City Council, they had added a budget line item to study the possibility of UBI, an actual UBI in Seattle. And it was just great to talk with Lorena and see that she was an actual UBI advocate, like the universal in UBI. Mm-hmm. And she really wanted to try that out for Seattle. So I was very disappointed that she did not win. Yeah, just across the board. But at the very least, I know at the county level, Dave Up the Grove, he was also considering a basic income pilot at the county level. So there's still some hope. There are some people out there. I mean, Teresa Mosqueda is still on Seattle City Council. And also at the state level, Joe Nguyen, he ran for King County Executive. He did not win, but he did propose adding a budget line item to the state budget to study the feasibility of a basic income. So I think there's also a legislative measure that's being pushed through at the state level also. So there's still something happening. Maybe not, it might not happen as fast as it would have if we had certain key people elected, but there's still hope. But yeah.
Cool. It's good there's still hope at least. One of the things I'm curious about is if you have like a favorite optimal like model for UBI. You know, like there's the Yang model, and then there's like the progressives who say that doesn't do enough for like the social safety net. Mm-hmm. And then there's the more like libertarian people who are like, I'll only do UBI if it gets rid of the rest of the other safety net. Mm-hmm. I'm curious if there's a certain form of UBI that you personally think would be best or optimal.
Yeah, that's something I've been thinking a lot about for the past like several months. And at first I was thinking like, yeah, let's get rid of the safety net, and like the getting rid of all that bureaucracy will actually, you know, free up more money to give to people. And I think I've come to a system where I think about it as, you know, our medical system again. So everybody gets a UBI, a certain amount of UBI, like across the board. And if people still need assistance on top of that, I feel like the social safety net should still be there to account for people who still who fall through the cracks. So people on disability, or people who have very, very low income or have other health issues, or people who had a catastrophic financial event happen and their UBI ran out and they're unable to work. I feel like those situations should be covered by some sort of safety net. The difference is that hopefully it will not be used quite as much as it is now, because in our current system, the social safety net is the first line of defense. You know, and I feel like that's not a great way to go, because you're essentially just accepting all these people who are in dire situations, and that really overloads the system, and it requires people who are suffering to go through all these hoops and fill out all this paperwork, like come to these meetings before we'll give you any money. So I feel like just give people a bunch of money, like let people take care of themselves as best they can, and people who need additional help, we still have a safety net to account for that.
I'm curious what your opinion is on Andrew Yang's current Forward Party. I mean, we talked about it a little bit, but I'd be interested to hear you talk more about like what you think about the third party approach and whether or not you think that that is a step that's needed to get a UBI, or whether you think that we can make it happen within the current two-party system.
Yeah, I think the fact that we have over 90 pilots happening primarily within, you know, the Democratic Party is proof that we don't need a third party to make it happen. I have nothing against third parties. Like, since I've been voting, I've only voted for the Democratic Party twice. You know, I've definitely, like, you know, voted for third parties. So for me, like, Andrew starting a third party, whatever. Like, I don't really think it's that consequential. My issue is more with him talking as if his third party is actually a thing, and that's actually doing something right now. Right now, it's just a PAC. It's just collecting money. And even when talking about UBI, it's not listed on his policy platforms. You know, that was one of the first things I looked at. It's like, okay, where's your UBI policy? And it's not there. And then, of course, like the people who are, I call them like Yang stands, they're like, oh, it's listed in his core beliefs for the party. It's like, UBI is not a core belief. UBI is a policy. And how is UBI a core belief? And if it were a core belief, why don't you have a policy to reflect that? So there's a lot of weird inconsistencies that I've been seeing with it. And I think his focus on voting rights, democracy reform, that's all great. That's absolutely great. But again, I have an issue with him centering kind of himself and his own work in all that, because like there's tons of democracy reforms organizations already. You know, like it's been happening, you know, like third party's been happening, like democracy reform's been happening. But I feel like Andrew has this compulsion to promote his own branded thing, like his own thing that he owns. And that's really my own, like the biggest issue I have with how he's going about it. And with UBI, when he started the Forward Party, he tweeted out something that essentially said, hey, like for the past couple years, I spent my time mainstreaming UBI, which it's not mainstream, but you know, he implied that it was mainstream. So now he's going to focus on democracy reforms. And so I'm like, okay, cool. He's out. And for me, it was actually kind of a relief because there is an issue within the basic income community that some of Yang's stands are actually a little bit embarrassing because basic income advocacy has been going on for decades. Right now, I'm the conference manager for the Basic Income Guarantee Conference, and they're on their 20th year of putting on this conference. And so the Yang campaign was just mainstreaming something that has been happening for a long time. I feel like a lot of the organizers that were within the Yang campaign, they like, I don't know, they kind of took his word as like the Bible. You know, it's like his version was the only version. And it was really difficult to integrate them into the larger basic income movement. So now it's like they're saying, oh, you can't have UBI until you have democracy reform, which is patently untrue because we have all these pilots. So it's, I feel like the people who are distracted by what Andrew is doing, it's like, great, go do that. It's a great cause to promote, but if you're doing it in order to get UBI passed, no, that's not the way to do it. Because democracy reforms, those are just a tool. You can put any policy into it. You know, it's like there's no logical, like UBI doesn't logically flow from having democracy reforms. So I don't know. for me, it's mostly just the messaging and just the way that he's going about it. But I mean, good luck to him and good luck to the people who are working on that. But I'm going to focus on UBI so that, when democracy reforms are passed, we have a solid base of people who know what UBI is and know what it can do for them and can actually advocate for it and want it as an actual policy.
Well, I think that's a pretty smart answer. Let's see, just gonna look over my notes for a second. Let's talk for a minute about kind of the idea of, like you were talking earlier about Andrew Yang's tendency to be like, ultra moderate, and really play the not left, not right. I'm the guy in the middle.
Right.
And how like there's kind of a tension, I guess, between trying to, yes, look at people you disagree with as humans and try to like communicate with them and find common ground, but then there's also like a little bit of like both sides are just as bad kind of tone to that. I'm curious, like, what's your approach in terms of finding that balance? Because that was such a big part of the Yang campaign and even part of their strategy, which, is questionable in terms of like Iowa. They were sending us out to talk to people who were conservatives and Republicans, and it's like these people aren't going to go to a Democratic caucus, like
Exactly.
as hard as much as they, may be intrigued by the idea of a basic income, like they're not going to switch parties to do that on a whim. So I'm curious, like, how you reflect on that idea now that some time has passed and like stuff has happened, like January 6th, where like that certainly like shook me up in terms of looking at like things like how do you find a common ground with somebody if if what they want is to make it so that like democracy doesn't work. Where's the common ground there? Like it becomes harder to make those leaps, I guess. So I'm curious where you're at in terms of the not left, not right, but forward philosophy.
Yeah, I definitely tried to subscribe to that when I was volunteering for the campaign. One of the most useful things that came out of that was taking deep canvassing training from somebody from, I think, Humanity Forward PAC, the original PAC.
Yeah.
They gave all the volunteers training before they went out, and one of them was the concept of deep canvassing, and ultimately the training was just about how to talk to people and finding common ground, like what is something that's important to them, and just talking about it in general and not necessarily pushing any particular policy. And ideally deep canvassing is supposed to happen over the course of a long time. And I think one of the pitfalls of trying to do it for a campaign was that we only had like 2 months to do it for the Iowa caucus. So it was never going to happen. There was no way we were going to able to hit the same house 3 times to get them to slowly, come warm up to the idea of supporting UBI or much less a Democratic candidate when they themselves are not. So I think there's value in starting those type of conversations. Absolutely. The key is speaking with people who are open to speaking. I think that's the biggest, the key thing. It's like talk to people who are willing to change. You can't force people to change when they don't. So the January 6th people, like, you're probably not going to reach them, especially coming from like, a liberal, progressive, a Democrat. They're just not going to listen just by virtue of who you are affiliated with. So that's kind of like a non-starter. So the best way is to have conversations where people want to have them and are open to having them. And it's got to be a long-term, consistent thing. And I think the way that just Andrew is going about it is kind of haphazard. And he talks about de-radicalization, but there is no such thing as mass de-radicalization. Like, if you want to de-radicalize somebody, like, you need to get to like their house, their family, their friends. You need to get to them, where they're at.
It's very personal.
Yeah, and because I mean, yeah, there is mass, there is mass indoctrination, absolutely, based on like who they listen to and like the opinions of the type of people that they hang around. But in order to de-radicalize somebody, it's like they need to want to find a different point of view.
Yeah.
Or they need to be shook out of it by something that happens. So I don't know. So I don't really buy his de-radicalization by being passive. I know there was a big controversy with him going on Tucker Carlson, which in itself, you know, if he can actually push back on some of his awful rhetoric, like even in like a little way, it would have been fine, whatever, have discourse. But the fact that he did not push back at all, that was the real issue. And like especially when Tucker was talking, like basically invalidating the existence of trans people, and Andrew just kind of sat back and didn't say anything. Like maybe he made a face. He could have said something like, well, you know, I disagree with you on that. Or it's like, I have a lot of trans friends and they're wonderful Americans. Just like, you know, just anything just to counteract that narrative. But he just, you know, sat there and promoted his book or his party. And I felt that that was just a severe lack of character and a complete misunderstanding of how de-radicalization happens, or how to have these kinds of conversations that move the conversation forward. And of course, like there was the other podcast appearance he made on the Pac-Man show or something, where the host asked a very specific question. It's like, hey, if I were a self-identified white supremacist, would I be welcome in the Forward Party? And Andrew literally said, yes. If they want to fight for democracy reform, then they are welcome. It's like, dude, like, what have you know, like, value? I don't know. It was kind of the nail in the coffin for me. It's like I am completely disavowing all of this centrist nonsense, especially if that's how you're going to go about it. So yeah.
So I'm thinking, well, I'm probably going to end up titling this interview is like Basic Income Beyond Andrew. Because I feel like that's the main theme here is like the Andrew Yang got this energy started, but like now where's the energy going? You know,
Right.
'cause he's not doing the best job of carrying the momentum. He's doing his own things. I think there's stuff to be respected within it, but also there's a lot left to be desired in terms of the basic income movement. So I'd love to end by pivoting back to what the future of basic income looks like beyond Andrew Yang. And maybe you could tell me a little bit about the upcoming Basic Income Guarantee conference that you were talking about.
Yeah. So yeah, I don't want to completely knock on what Andrew is doing right now. It's like there are plenty of people who still support him, which is great if that's where they want to put their energy. And I feel like there might still be some basic income stuff that he might be doing, but I just stopped following him in that respect. So yeah, if that's the way you want to go and that's, you know, that's your passion, awesome. Like that, I'm not going to knock that at all because it's better to have more people working on it than not. In terms of the Basic Income Guarantee Conference, it is in its 20th year. Last year, so I was a conference manager last year, and it was our first time going fully virtual. So we had like 650 registrants over the course of 3 days. I think like 30 plus sessions. It was really great, and we had a lot of people from the basic income community just presenting some of the projects that they've been doing. We've had a couple people talk about their own pilots that they started, like either from their nonprofit or just even micro pilots of just 2 recipients through like a local food bank. So just giving people ideas on how you as an individual can do something to make an impact in your community. And of course, there were lots of discussions about how to pay for it, the benefits in different respects with like mental health, care work, feminism, intersectionality. And so this year we're doing a hybrid version of the conference. We're trying to stay as safe as possible, but it is going to happen in Portland, Oregon this year. It's going to be, oh shoot, I should know this off the top of my head, but it's like June 24th through 26th, I believe. So the first 2 days are going to be on site in Portland with you can also attend virtually for a lot of those sessions. And the last day is going to be fully virtual. So in the past, it was a collaboration with American and Canadian basic income groups. So hopefully we'll get a lot more Canadian involvement because there's a lot of stuff happening.
It seems like almost more is happening on the
yes.
basic income front up there than it is down here.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Like, although like the whole Ontario pilot being canceled early, oh man, like there were a lot of sessions based on that. Like one was about the ethics of ending something like that because people were relying on that money,
Yeah.
you know, and it's like, what responsibility do people have to continue programs to the end? Yeah, so there's a lot of really great conversations happening, and we really love seeing more grassroots involvement. In the past, it used to be a lot of academics like presenting papers to each other and having discussions. And especially last year, we brought in way more grassroots involvement. I think one big project that was presented was the Oregon People's Rebate that's going on down in Oregon. So I think it's, I believe they're estimating about $750 per person per year. It's a very modest rebate, but it would be universal. And I think there's like a minimum, maybe like three years of residency for you to qualify. But yeah, they're collecting signatures right now to try to make it onto the ballot. And they have some seasoned, experienced people working on the ballot initiative who have done that kind of work before. So yeah, there's a lot of interesting things happening. And one of the best things about it is to meet and talk with players within the basic income space and meeting other grassroots organizers and possibly starting new projects or getting your own project promoted there. So yeah, I'm really excited for it.
Sounds like a lot of fun. I don't know if I'll be able to make it, but maybe I'll at least tune in online if I can't make it in person. Here's a question for you. Do you ever think that you'll run for office?
Oh, hells no. Oh, hells no. So, so I kind of make it my a core value of mine not to run for office, and that kind of directs how I do certain things. So, so I'm part of a PAC that runs the endorsement process for an Asian American political organization, and I did interviews with a lot of the candidates in this last cycle, and at least 2 candidates probably remember me not so fondly. So the new mayor, I definitely I definitely went hard on the new mayor about certain things, and also a new city council member. I definitely went hard on her. Also, I'm pretty sure they remember my name and or face, but at the very least how I made them feel. So, they counted on that.
Could I ask what you went hard on them for?
Oh boy. For Bruce, he was talking about how, yeah, he's going to stand up to Amazon and just like talking all tough about it. And I'm like, wait, didn't y'all pass that head tax? And then when Amazon pressured y'all like repealed that tax, within like a span of a few months. And he got very confrontational with me about that. It did not leave a good impression with the endorsement committee, and but he won, so I guess some people do like that tough talk, even if he doesn't actually walk the walk. Yeah.
Well, thank you very much for taking the time to talk to me about this. Is there anything else that you would like to add that I've forgotten to ask about?
No, I mean, this was a really great conversation. Thank you so much for asking me to be here and talk about it. I feel like I'm not anything special, like for me, I'm just like a case study in somebody who is able to drop everything and just go for it. I've been able to get into some really interesting spaces to talk with, influential people, mostly because I just went in and did it. So I feel like if, people want to get involved. Like starting small is great. If you want to do more, it can get you into a lot of places, and and it's very surprising what's happened in the past couple of years for me. So yeah, I hope people do want to get involved, and because our voice is powerful, just because not a lot of people step up. So those that do can get pretty far.
Yeah, well, definitely don't undersell yourself because of that, because that's one of the reasons why I reached out to you, is just because I've been able to tell that you've really stayed laser focused on this, despite the fact that it has been kind of hard to figure out which direction to keep pushing the movement. But it seems like you've been one of the people who's been on the forefront of trying to make sure that there's still stuff happening. So I appreciate that. I'm sure there are others out there who appreciate that as well. Would you like to drop any plug any sort of social media or places where people could volunteer or anything else for people to find you or your organizations or anything?
Yeah, my Twitter is at nowhannah1, so it is a palindrome, and I highly recommend following everything from Income Movement. They are a great grassroots organization, and you can do a lot just from the comfort of your own home. They give you a lot of things to do that are very easy, and also opportunities to do more things if you so choose. So yeah, get linked up with Income Movement.
Cool. Well, thank you so much, Hannah. Handshake.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Okay, thank you guys for watching. I hope you enjoyed the conversation. I know that we may have gone a little hard on our criticisms of Andrew Yang in this conversation, and I want to make it clear that I do like the guy and I really support what he's trying to do. But I also do think that the UBI movement needs to be able to grow and expand beyond just one person. And I thought it was really interesting to talk to Hannah about how that can happen. So yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed. If you are a fan of Yang's policies, you might also want to check out my previous video where I talked about the differences between ranked choice voting and approval voting. That was also a pretty interesting episode. So check it out if you want. Hit subscribe if you'd like to see more conversations like this, and have a great day. Thank you guys for watching.